So, yesterday I found out this tweet from this gentleman, Joshua Michael French, and it says the value of book Jiggle is that it has to be put into a game deliberately. It requires effort. Developers who do it reflect aesthetics, design philosophy, and creative freedom that I can appreciate. It's no coincidence that these end up being favorites for more than that reason alone. So this is a concept that I have talked about many times, but I have never extended myself into it. It's always just like random lines that I throw out, random concepts. And I thought that this could be like a good opportunity to talk about it. So I did a comic about it, and it's more like the comic is about it when I wanted to expand, because I also wrote. Whenever I do a comic, what I do is obviously a comic has to be like a very short thing to the point with a punchline. And what I do is usually expand myself with a long text with all of the details of what I mean. But then looking at the reactions and so on. So, uh, and I decided that I'm gonna put the comic at the end because if I bring up the comic right now, uh, I'm gonna talk about all of the people who were angry about it and all of the because basically no one has made a single coherent argument about what against what I say. Everything is either strawmans or people calling you an incel, which is like the new insult for whenever you are in disagreement with someone is they are an incel. That's with work. So I'm gonna show it at the end, and at first I'm going to talk about what you are come probably to see by the title, because if I start talking about the stupid answers for people, it's gonna be like half an hour of it. So I'm gonna first talk about the topic, and then I will bring out the the comic. So the thing is that the concept is more that about what you have seen probably that this in vogue nowadays, the whole discussion about sexy female characters in video games, in all, honestly, but specifically about video games because this is the topic. And it's basically that in recent times, like especially in the West, not so much in Japan, but there are also some companies in Japan that are doing it. But basically, these designs have been going like more and more ugly with the female characters, and now like the standard for female characters in the West is something that is very plain and not very feminine. So now every time that Eastern company releases a game with a sexy female character like Stellar Blade, for example, there is a lot of backlash from a certain group of people that they are say that the game that is sexist, this shouldn't exist. Uh, Games like this shouldn't be done anymore. Anyone who likes it is an incel. You want sexy female characters because you want to masturbate 24/7. That's the kind of thing that you hear all the time. And on the opposite side, that you have like when ugly characters are done in a video game, you have like a reaction against that too. Like people saying, "Oh, the game has this design, so the game is gonna suck," and then of course you have people saying, "Oh, you're an incel for saying that," and there's this whole discussion about people uh, using the designs in a game as adjustment from for how the game is gonna be, and then a whole other people who say like, "Oh, like they think." That this means that the only thing that the gamers are looking for is like the character has to be like a super big TD bimbo. But the thing is that this is not what it is. The thing, and this is something that most people, most gamers, intuitively know, but they probably can't articulate, or even if they can articulate, they don't have the time because I mean, you are talking on Twitter, you're not, it's 200 or something characters. You are not going to write a Bible, which is what you will need to explain all of this to people. So usually this is not something that people extend themselves very much or even know how to express themselves about it. But most people instinctively know more or less what this tweet is saying is that there is when you see certain designs, what you see is kind of like the design philosophy of the game, and the design philosophy of the game can tell you things about how the game is going to be, and also like how much creative freedom they have, how much they are forced to do by the higher ups or the society imposition and things like that. And I talk about this in like the text that I did with the comic, but I felt that looking at the comments from people, I think that I can expand more on it, because I think that maybe some of the things I said you only understand them if you have like a basis of where all of the things are coming from, because I say that you can recognize the design philosophy of a game, but maybe just saying that you don't understand exactly what this means. So I'm going to first explain a few concepts, and I know that it's going to sound weird, but uh, this is will tie up with the whole thing about female sexy female characters in a game. But I have to explain all of this. So there's three concepts. First is the competency crisis. Then there is what is called Lysenkoism, and then what is called toxic positivity. So the competency crisis is something that usually has happened historically in governments, but can also happen in companies. And it's basically that instead of hiring people or putting people in important positions due to the skill they have and the knowledge they have on that area, what you do is put them there because of other reasons that are unrelated to their skill. And that usually is done because they have like the same ideology from the party that is in power in government, or some other reasons when it comes to companies or other groups. But basically, what it means is that you put people in place that don't have enough skill, or have less skill than they will have if you hire based on skill, and so the overall skill of whatever they are doing drops. Now, the next concept is Lysenkoism. Lysenkoism is kind of an extension of the competitive crisis, but it's more specific. So the term Lysenkoism comes from, again, it happens usually in governments, but the one case that is more relevant, and is when the name Lysenkoism comes from, is from the Soviet Union. What happened in the Soviet Union is that when the communists came into power, they basically fired people from important areas like science, technology, like agriculture. They kicked out the people who knew how to do the job to put people who were akin to the ideology of the party, the communist ideology. And at some point, what happened is that because all of the people who were in those areas were all ideologically homogeneous, they had no one there who would tell them that the ideas were wrong, because they all thought exactly the same. And they started to do things like applying communist, like Marxist ideology to their areas of expertise. Even when it, and what it is like, that didn't make sense, because they apply things based on ideology instead of the facts of the situation. And the name Lysenko comes because one of these people was Lysenko, who was, if I remember correctly, I think he was in, I don't know if I remember if he was a minister, but basically he was in agriculture. And what he did is that this guy was a communist, and he thought that every piece of science that came from the West was just capitalist science, and that means that it's incorrect because it's capitalist. So he rejected, like, for example, genes, the concept of genes, he rejected it, geneticism, and all of that. And instead, he tried to apply Marxism to agriculture. And he tries to apply ideas such as, and I'm not kidding, you can find this on the internet if you want to search for it, this is absolutely real. He, for example, he forced the collective farms in Russia to plant the seeds in a way. I mean, I'm not a farmer, so I can tell you all of the exact specifics, but basically they planted a lot of plants of seeds very, very close to each other, and they were plants that absolutely could not do that. They have to be separated. And the reason why he did that is because he said that plants of the same class will have class conscience and they will not take resources from each other. And this is real. I swear. Like, so the guy had like ideas like this, like he used like communist ideology about class conscience and the class fight to agriculture, and basically what it caused is that a lot of the plantations went to seed, and there were immense famines that caused the death of millions of people. So Lysenkoism is kind of a term that refers to when people are so ideologically homogeneous in an area that they start to try to apply their ideology instead of the facts of whatever area they are. Like if it is science, they will ignore the science and they will say, uh, they will try to apply things based on the ideology that they have, and fuck it about science. And, you know, this has done obviously in other areas. I mean, religious people, for example, in the very past also did this thing about doing things because they think that's what the Bible said instead of what the science said, even after when they knew what the science was, all of this thing. But usually happens more with the left. The left it kind of tends to do this more, and that's why the term Lysenkoism is used. And the other term is toxic positivity. And what toxic positivity, what it means is that you have an environment in which everything has to be like this very, very forth positive to the point that it's absolutely damaging. And like for example, you cannot say anything negative against anything. You cannot point out flaws in something because that's negative. You cannot use feedback from the users because user feedback is usually negative, and so on. So what you create is an environment in which things cannot be done correctly because you cannot correct mistakes, you cannot apply feedback because everything has to be super positive. And because everything is super positive, like you never even know what are the things that are wrong that you have to fix. No, I want to specifically mention how these things apply to video games. And for example, in the competency crisis, how it affects video games in the last decade is that about a decade ago, what started to happen, and we know this because of a lot of interviews and leaks about, the interviews to developers, leaks from internal memos from companies, etc., that what happened is that about 10 years ago, they started to fire a lot of the veteran developers in many studios. Again, this is not everything that I'm talking about is like in a general sense. Obviously, it doesn't mean that it's in an absolute and happens every single time, which is one of the strawmans that people try to use with when I made the comic, even if I specify several times that wasn't the case. I know that it won't matter that I specified it now, that I'm not talking in like every case. I know I will have people telling me, oh, you are saying that every single time. Okay, whatever you want. This is kind of a general sense. A lot of studios did this, doesn't mean that all of them did this. But a lot of studios what started to do is they fired veteran developers to substitute for more diverse developers, like firing white people, straight people, men, to put in women, black people, Hispanic people, heterosexual, homosexual people, transsexual people, instead of hiring by skill. So the first uh, thing that the people hiring had as the top priority was to hire the women, gay men, transsexual, etc., etc., etc. So when you do the selection that way, what happens obviously is that you create a competency crisis because you are hiring people that are less prepared. And this is not saying, because also I know that people will say this stupid shit, that I'm saying that like black people are less skilled or women are less skilled or whatever. This will happen exactly the same if you did it in the opposite way. Like you had as your first priority hire white men instead of skill, you will have the case that you will have a woman which is the most skilled and she's not hired because you have priority hire white men. But in this case, what happened is that, they had to, instead of hiring, like if they had 10 candidates and the best ones were 3 white males, they will not hire them and they will hire the black guy who was the 7th and the woman who was the 8th. And they probably obviously know something about development, but they are not the best for the job. They are like the 10th option. This is something that happens in a lot of areas, by the way. In Spain, it's happening right now in the government. Uh, I don't want to go in like a tangent, but a quick example: the leader of uh, no, how this called, the one that's in charge now of the public TV, the Spanish public TV, is someone who, when they did the tests for the position, she ended in almost the last position. I think it was like 200 people for the trying to get the position, and she ended like the 200 something, about the one of the bottom ones, and she won the position because she's an affiliate of the Socialist Party, which is the one in power right now. So the Socialist Party said, we don't care about the test, just put this woman there. So basically, she's the absolute worst option that you could ever have for the position, but she's there because, who she is. And that's kind of what I mean. Is like you have people who, yeah, probably they have some knowledge about it, but maybe they are like people who have just gone out of college, they don't have that much idea, and you hire them because they are like a black woman instead of hiring like a white dude who has 10 years of experience, for example. That's the thing, the difference. So with that creates is that a competency crisis is in the gaming studios. Now, Lysenkoism is in video games is happening because, in part because of this, in part because the way that people have to hire right now is by diversity and inclusion, and also by nepotism. Like people obviously are hiring people who are ideologically similar. You are gonna have and the people who are more like conservative. A lot of them are saying, "I left the job because I couldn't handle like the environment." Like you couldn't say absolutely anything, or you will get like completely destroyed, and then they will harass you every day. So basically, you have environments in which everyone is absolutely ideologically homogeneous in that they are like very woke, and that creates that they don't have anyone to tell them any diverting opinion on how things are to be done. So they end up doing things based on ideology rather than what is gonna work. And you can see that directly in how the designs are done on all of that. Like obviously doing designs that are less attractive in female characters is done because feminism, and because they are all developers and studio are almost all feminists. They go like, oh, doing a sexy character is sexist, so we're going to do it like more more um, more toned down, or even ugly, fat and things like that, because to be inclusive and all of that. And the toxic positivity, I actually there's actually a recent example of this, so I'm gonna use that example to talk about it. And this example I'm gonna use it a lot because I'm talking about Concord. I use Concord in the comic, but I didn't use it as I'm talking about this specifically about Concord. I use just the image, but I mentioned it that this is like a lot of video games where it's happening, and people use that to strawman the whole comic and hyper focus on that, and pretend that the comic was entirely talking about Concord, and they started arguing about Concord. But the thing is that even if the comic was about Concord, I can use it as an example because, well, I will talk about it alongside the whole discussion. But in the topic of toxic positivity, we have an interview that I think was done by Colin Moriarty, or maybe Colin Moriarty was hosting the discussion when it happened. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was Colin Moriarty that they interviewed a developer from Concord, and the developer said that one of the main reasons the game went to shit is because they had a toxic positivity culture, and basically they couldn't say the things that were wrong with the game. So because they couldn't say what was wrong with the game, because that's toxic negativity, so you can't talk about that. They didn't know what they had to fix for the game. They also couldn't listen to player feedback because they considered that that players are chats, are sexist, and all of that they will say. so they couldn't hear to player feedback. So basically, that see the cost, like the gameplay obviously was bad, and they didn't even know what they had to fix. They also didn't have direction, which is also something that I have heard a lot in leaks and interviews, that the game studios right now have no leadership. In they don't have people, and this connects again with the competency crisis. They don't have people whose skill of leading others. So the game's end up with no direction, and it happened with Concord. So basically, yes, that applies to game. You have like cultures in which they cannot address what things are wrong with the game because they have this culture. Now, how all this ties to the topic of the female characters. So all of these things, they are not exclusive of this, obviously, but all of these things are things that are very typical from studios that are like very like woke, hyper activist, progressive, and so on. So they have like the competency crisis because they do a lot of hiring by diversity instead of skill. The Lysenkoism because they all end up being woke, and woke culture usually also includes the toxic positivity. So games that have studios that are overly woke usually have problems in all areas of development. I'm not referring to like they are not sexy because that's another other traumas that people may like. I was claiming that the only metric for a game being good or not is if the female character is hot, and that's absolutely completely unrelated to anything I have said. So the point is that you have certain things that indicate you that a game is going to have problems in all of areas. Like they're going to have problems in writing because the first of the writers are going to be less skilled because of the competency crisis. They're going to be ideologically involved in putting the message on doing stories in a certain way or not doing stories in a certain way. There are stories, I have examples of, for example, interviews to developers in which they were in meetings to see how they will do the story, and they were constantly, you can do this because it's offensive, you can do this because it's this or that, and then the writers got absolutely frustrated with that because they couldn't do any kind of story because everything was offensive, everything was something. There is a Life is Strange, for example. There is an interview in which they are talking about how the main I think was the CEO or something that he had a lot of ideas to do stories that kind of push boundaries, and every single time they tried to do one of the stories, like the other people in the room were like, "Oh, that's offensive," and the guy was like, "But we have to like, these are hard stories, but it's like." He was trying to do stories kind of like the Joker, for example. It's like a hard story in which a lot of shitty things happen to him, but it's a story that talks about mental health. So he wanted to do something like that, the stories to talk about certain topics, but he couldn't because everything was offensive and you couldn't do it. And then these studios also have like the toxic positivity, like you can't improve things you don't know what things are wrong in the gameplay, for example, because no one tells you. You can hear the feedback. So basically, there is a certain type of people in the studios, certain kind of idea, which is kind of like, say, like woke, super activist, progressive ideas that limit what you can. Well, it limits also. This is another topic, but it also limits your creative freedom because you cannot. You are the artist. And there are also examples of this that. Interviews with artists in which they say I wanted to do the designs this way, but from the top they were telling me no, you have to do it less sexy, yada yada. So they have less creative freedom because ideologically from the top they are being told no, you can do this, you have to do this less sexy. So what they mean is that tying up with the sexy female characters is that when you see the how characters are made in a game, is kind of like one of the first indicators because obviously that's the first thing that you see in a game. They release the designs or they release a trailer and you see how the designs are done. Those designs can indicate you kind of what is the ideology and the design philosophy of that company, that studio. So if a studio is something like Stellar Blade, and you see, they have this sexy character and they are not worried, like so the camera angles are very sexy and they are not worried about doing all of these things. What you can understand from that is that that company probably has a lot of freedom to do whatever the fuck they wanted. They don't have Sony on the top, like they are in other studios telling them, no, you have to tone down these designs or censor these designs. And they also don't have these kinds of issues, like they don't have like the competency crisis, toxic positivity, that is going to affect things like gameplay or story or characters. They don't have, probably, I mean, this is obviously, again, this is not an absolute. What I'm saying is that is like an indication that is probably most likely that the studios have a lot more freedom and healthy environment to create this the game. And that means that probably the gameplay is not going to be handicapped by the ideas that like the gameplay is not going to be handicapped by harmful ideas that the developers might have. They may be bad simply because they do a bad gameplay, but that's a completely separate issue. But it's like more likely that there are more chances that it's going to be like a good job. But if you see a game in which they uglify the characters, or it doesn't even have to be that. It has to be, it can be that it's the next entry in a franchise, and the previous franchise have like 60 characters, and the new one tones down them a lot. That means that there's having a change in the management or the design philosophy of the game. Or if you have a Japanese game that has sexy designs, but when it comes to the West, they censor it. This means that they are changing things for the West, and they may have a change in the design philosophy and take out things from the gameplay, which happened, for example, in Fire Emblem. They literally took out parts of the gameplay because the localizer found them offensive. So basically, that's kind of what I mean. Like it's the how the characters are done visually is kind of like a first indicator of what you can expect later. And Concord is actually a very good example of that, despite how many people were angry that I use Concord as an example, because they say, oh, Concord didn't fail because of the designs, it failed because the story was shit and the characters were very annoying and the gameplay was bad and it was a hero shooter and hero shooters are out of the loop already. And I'm like, no, but literally it makes reference to that. Like, why why the gameplay in Concord is bad and why it's a hero shooter despite hero shooters being outdated? Because they had a toxic positivity culture in which they couldn't have the criticism that that you're doing a hero shooter or this part of the gameplay is bad. Why the characters are annoying? Because they probably have a Lysenkoist mentality in the studio that made them create the characters with kind of like these personalities that modern characters in entertainment have, like the guild boss and all of these things that people hate. This, I don't want to go into the topic of movies and so, but movies do this a lot. Like the new female characters tend to be a lot of times there are Mary Sues or there are guild bosses. Uh, they do female protagonists that completely misunderstand what was the things that made male characters to be interesting. So what they do is that they make the female characters just to be completely annoying and rude and hurt people for absolutely no reason whatsoever, and they think that that's what make a hero. So you have female characters that are very annoying and nobody likes, and probably that mentality is what has caused that the characters are completely annoying. And why the story is bad was probably because of the same reasons, because the story couldn't do a lot of things because they have this homogeneous ideology, or the writers are not very good because there's a competency crisis. So yes, kinda, when you see that the designs from the game are like, we are doing a lot of like ugly designs that are very indicative of, oh, this is diverse, like the super fat person who's also black and whatever, and you have all of these things that are kind of screaming DI woke. When you see that, like it's not an absolute again, but it's kind of you see that and it's like, okay, this game probably is going to have this development culture, this design philosophy, and it's probably going to have a lot of problems, and so it's probably going to be bad. And that's what happened. And the game came out, and before the game came out, people was like, yeah, this game's probably going to be bad, and it was absolutely right. The game was bad. And there are a lot of games lately in which that happens. Like the trailers come out or whatever, the designs are screaming the eye because they are kind of ugly. Also, I have to know that, well, two things. First, when I say ugly or pretty, I'm not saying like the sexy girl with two enormous boobs. Aesthetically pleasing doesn't mean sexualized. It means, like, for example, Mario is an aesthetically pleasing game because you see the designs are aesthetically pleasing, which is funny because I also mentioned this in the text in the comic, and I had people like saying, "No, this is false because Mario doesn't have sexy woman and is successful." And I'm like, I literally talk about this. Like I mention Mario literally by name in my example. Why are you saying this? And yes, like Disney movies, for example, they are aesthetically pleasing. Like there's a lot of things that are aesthetically pleasing. Like the Mirror's Edge is aesthetically pleasing, and none of them have like hypersexualized women or something. When I talk about pretty sexually aesthetically pleasing is things that are pretty to the human eye because humans are an aesthetic species basically. We completely discriminate by aesthetics. Like aesthetics, like how pretty you are is a kind of one of the biggest indications of success or lack of success. Like much more, there are studies about this, like much more than race, sex, or whatever else, and in your identity, like being attractive or not attractive gives you more or less success. And you can see it in all of species. Like we kill animals depending on if they are pretty or not. Like two insects, you kill one or protect one because it's a butterfly or it's another insect that is harmless but is ugly. Like we absolutely discriminate by appearance. Uh, what I was talking about. I lost my track. I think I was talking about Concord and the designs. Yeah, basically, I think what we're saying is that when you see certain designs, it tells you kind of like this hints you to a lot of things. It's like what is called, you know, the concept of a litmus test. A litmus test is when you make a question or something that the answer to to that question reveals you a lot more information about someone than what the question itself is, depending on what you respond. There's a lot of litmus tests for a lot of things. And I think this is what it is. It's kind of like a litmus test. You see that a company releases a trailer and the characters are like super, yeah, they follow this trend of uglification and DEI. And it's not that it's bad that a character is like, you know, like black or woman or whatever. It's just that when a game is like screaming that that character is there because of woke ideology. You know, like I don't know, like in Battlefield, you remember the controversy with Battlefield. That Battlefield has always been like a game that was more or less, I mean, trying to follow like a realistic. We follow the World Wars scenario, and then they did the game for World War One, and suddenly they had a dark-skinned woman who lacked, I think, an arm and a leg, and had like mechanic arm and leg, and was like killing soldiers left and right, and people were like, "What the fuck were you talking about?" And of course, there was a lot of commentary about you are sexist, you're an incel, or whatever. And it's like, no, it's that this is a game that is more or less following a realistic trend, and suddenly you have someone that absolutely will never be there. Like you don't have a dark-skinned woman with a mechanic arm in World War One. That's just not how it is. So that basically is screaming that that character is there because of the diversity and inclusion. So there is something woke going on in the development, and if there is something woke going on in the development, it may lead to some of the problems that I have talked about. And I'm not sure about Battlefield 1 because I don't play, but I have heard that the game had like a lot of issues in gameplay and things like that. And that's basically it. That's basically the, the core of the issue that you have people who think that oh, this is just that you want big bimbos in everything and you want to masturbate and you're an incel. One is what it is that it's an indication of a lot of issues that maybe with the game. Censorship is another, right? You have in the climate that we have now, obviously the thing that is censored is sexy designs. Like maybe in another era in history they weren't censored, but right now, uh, what the developers are stopped to do is the sexy characters. So when you see a game having sexy characters, it at least tells you that the developers probably have like, more freedom. And if the game is censored or toned down from previous games or whatever, it tells you that there has been a change in philosophy. Essentially that the characters, what they do is reveal you what is the design philosophy, and the design philosophy might tell you that there might be some of these issues, and these issues might lead to bad gameplay, a bad story, bad characters, and bad designs overall. It's an indication, and that's why people, whenever they see like ugly designs or DI designs, they go like, "Oh, this game is going to be shit and not going to buy it." Obviously, as I say, these people maybe they don't know how to articulate all of this; they just know it instinctively, or even if they know how to say it. I have spent already half an hour explaining this. People usually don't have half an hour in text in Twitter to explain all of this in depth. And I know that even how much I have explained it, these people are going to Strauman it to hell. So why would you spend half an hour explaining this only to have people Straumaning you to hell? So, and now it's when I'm gonna show you the comic and uh, maybe mention some of the Straumans. Like, for example, yeah, the comic is basically this. I show that games with ugly or designs are failing, and I use a Concord image, but you can see that I'm talking in plural, and then in the text that I wrote, the text is basically all of the things that I have said here in video, maybe a little less because I don't talk about the competency crisis, but basically more or less what I have said in the video is what I wrote in the text. So I wrote several times that this is about a lot of games. Then games with the designs are succeeding. Again, people are Strauman to say that I'm only talking about Stellar Blade or I'm only talking about Concord. Then I have the girl talking about how maybe it's that humans are attracted to pleasing things, or maybe censoring or toning down rebels the same philosophy. This, but no, the gamers are incels. And you may be saying, oh, but maybe people are angry because you did the character like, like a fat Tumblrite. Usually, I don't draw the characters in my comics like this, even if they are like feminist, woke, or whatever. I just draw them like a normal person. But in this case, I wanted to draw like this because I have observed that almost every time that someone calls you an incel, they look like this. Like I think that is like one of the biggest cases of projection ever. Like anytime that you have someone call you an incel, if you can see like they have some photo or the avatar, how they look, it's like the biggest case of projection ever. Like it's like you have not have sex in your life and you are calling people incels. Like very obviously that these people are just trying to virtue signal. A lot of people did basically that. Like the responses from people were Straumans, like the people who were pretending that the comic talk only about Concord, which, by the way, I have already talked that yes, the ugly designs are kind of an indication that even if you tell me like no, Concord was bad because the characters, the story, and the gameplay, okay, those things are bad because of the toxic positivity and all of that stuff. And yeah, a lot of people pretending that I have said that the only metric for gaming good is if the characters are sexy. which I mean, I have no idea. Literally, at no single point in the entire video, as you have listened, and no point in the comic, and at no point in my text, I have ever said that the important thing in the game is that the characters are sexy. I literally, what I'm telling you is that sexy characters, what they are, is an indication of other things that are important that are going to be worse, like story, gameplay, characters, etc. So to see my text or to listen to this video and come to the conclusion that I'm saying that the metric for games be good is that the girls have big boobs is like, yeah, you basically have not listened or read absolutely anything. And you're just screaming incel because you want to virtue signal. And the people who want to virtue signal is because they have something to hide, usually, or they are bullies who want to keep bullying people while pretending to be the good guys. Like, I have absolute contempt for anyone who does this kind of virtue signal, and I'm going to send you to fuck yourself in the worst thing that I can possibly think of. And that's what basically what most people did, like all kind of traumas, uh, like you are saying that this is an absolute that happens in every single case, and they try to put examples of, oh, this game doesn't have sexy characters and it was successful. It's, well, okay, it has nothing to do with anything I have said, because what I have said is that is an indication that there may be issues in development, so the game may be worse. A worse game can still sell, especially if it has brand recognition. A worse game can still be good, but it could be better. And also, as I said, aesthetically pleasing doesn't mean like big boobs. Again, people trying to use Mario as a counterexample when I literally talk about Mario in my example, in my text. That Mario is an aesthetically pleasing game. A lot of games are aesthetically pleasing. Overwatch is aesthetically pleasing. A lot of games are aesthetically pleasing. Concord is not an aesthetically pleasing game. And there's a lot of I don't know. I will have to go to see the comments, but I think the video is too long already, like 40 minutes of video. But yes, basically, I haven't seen any single comment yet that tries to argue against anything that I have said. Like, there are people who have put arguments that are complete traumas, like they are arguing about something that I have never said, and then they call you an incel and all of that. And it's like you haven't listened to anything I have said. Like, you cannot listen or read what I have just said in this video and come to the conclusion that what I'm saying is that I want to masturbate to characters. Like this, there is absolutely like is the complete opposite of what I'm saying. I'm not even making reference to like the characters having to be like sexy women. Like, you can do Peach if you want. That's aesthetically pleasing, okay? But don't, if you do the Concord character like this, it's like when people are gonna have like issues, or you dump down designs from previous game, which is something that happens a lot. Like Dragon Age, there is a lot of discussion with this right now. The whole the characters are uglier than previous games and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like you can even have the character being still like not ugly, but is less attractive than the previous game, which is like toning down the designs. And it's again can indicate you that something is happening in the studio, in the design philosophy, etc., etc. So yeah, basically, in conclusion, is basically that all of that I have said is basically to point out that when you see designs that are intentionally uglified and very like indicating that they are done because of DEI, what indicate like the issue is not that you have a female character who is not attractive, or the issue is not that you have like a black character or whatever. The issue is that it reveals a mentality, a design philosophy that is probably going to affect the whole game in all of the aspects of the game, from design, story, characters, gameplay, and all of the aspects of the game that you can think of, whatever you like from a game, is going to be affected by several issues. This is obviously not all that there is to it. This is just basically the topic I wanted to talk about. There are more things to it and more things that cause the game to be good or bad than this. But again, means is that it's like a first look indicator. Like when you haven't tried the game yet, you don't have still a way to factually know, okay, how good this game is. You have to go by other factors, and one of those factors is aesthetics. And you look at the aesthetics, and if the aesthetics are screaming that the developers might be too deep into the woke end of the of woke mentality, it's probably going to lead to several problems that are going to cause the game to be worse in all aspects. And honestly, I have checked this to be true in almost all cases. There are a few examples because I know that people will probably try to go, oh, this game was woke, it was successful. Okay, there are some games which it happens. Of course, there are millions of games. You want to have absolutely everything under the sun. But it usually, like in almost all cases that I have seen, if a game starts to have signs in the early process, like when they are showing to you that they are overly uglified or DI woke in what they are doing, then the game comes out and the game has a subpar gameplay, subpar story, subpar characters, and all of that. Usually like that. They're very even the games that are like you can see that there is a woke design process in them that I have liked. They would have been better without it because the parts that are woke are definitely like the worst part. Like there will be a lot to tell to, for example, about Baldur's Gate, which is the example that people make of, oh, this game has woke things and it's successful. Yes, it's successful because it has things from D&D that it does very well because it's D&D and D&D is good. And it applies D&D very well, so that's... and those things are to praise from the game. I like the game. I beat it 3 times. But it has woke things that are definitely the worst things in the game. Like the way that relationships work in that game is obviously very influenced by a woke mentality, and it's bad. Like the how the characters, for starters, the all characters are bisexual by default. It's bad, and not because they are bisexual. That's not the issue at all. Many of the characters that we make comics are gay, bisexual, black, whatever. Uh, but it's an issue because it's basically like turning the characters. You know this problem that people talk about objectification of characters. Yeah, that's it. Like not doing a female character that's sexy or whatever. That's just doing something aesthetically pleasing. But doing characters who basically, like in Baldur's Gate, that the moment they meet you, they want to fuck you because that's how it works. Like they meet you and instantly want to fuck you, and they want to fuck you regardless of what you are. You are a man, you are a woman, you are a dragon because you can play as like a dragon. It doesn't matter. They will fuck you. That's objectifying the characters because you are turning them into just sex toys. But because they are bisexual, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's good. And it's like, yeah, you can see how, doing that is kind of like sitting into probably a design process that is a little on the woke side, on the like LGBT. Wait, how is the word in English? Libertinage? No. Uh, I don't know how to say this word in English. But like this ultra sexually open, like LGBT thing is kind of like trying to go into that. But yeah, I think that most people that have played the game, and in all areas, even like the LGBT people are saying that yeah, the way that the game does relationships is kind of bad. They even have to tone it down, like make it so the characters were less sexually open because it was too exaggerated. And even today is like that. So yeah, even when a game you can say, oh, okay, this game was successful and the game was good, and it had like a kind of a little of a woke design philosophy, it's still like, okay, but it could have been better. If it didn't have things like that, it has like normal relationships. If it has a bisexual character and heterosexual, and then another one that's just a lesbian, and you have to make an effort to date them. Yeah, they don't want to fuck you the moment they see you. If it has like that, it will be better than how it is now. So yeah, I think I'm gonna end it now, like 50 minutes too long already. I wanted to do 30. You want, I don't usually do a lot of videos, but you can follow the channel. You can follow I do a lot of mature content and sexy woman in Patreon. It's patreon.com/Kukurullo, and I'm Kukurullo in basically all social media if you want to follow. So goodbye until next time.